Yep.
All right, it's 9 o'clock, and I think we should call the City of Vero Beach Utilities Commission meeting together. Mr. Teston, Mr. McDermott, and Mr. Stradley will not be here, so we will go from there. First order of business is approval of last time's minutes. Do I have any additions or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, will I hear a motion to approve?
Motion to approve the minutes.
I second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Does anybody in the public want to make any comments? All right. Please state your name and address, please.
My name is Mike Oxner, and I live at 130 Waterway Lane, Indian River Shores. And as you may or may not know, I'm on the town council for the town of Indian River Shores, but I'm here as a ratepayer, not as a councilman. And I understand that FPL has made it known to the town or to the city that they are interested in purchasing the assets and I think the customer base from the city that pertains to the portion of our town that's served by the City of Vero Beach Utilities. And I just wanted to make my observation that it would seem that given that we're in a lawsuit right now and that, outcomes are very unpredictable and the possibility exists that if the town prevails, that you will lose not only the customers, but you'll lose the assets as well. And if you could work out a deal where they would give you something, cash or some other considerations, and resolve the lawsuit, then we wouldn't have to continue. I mean, save a lot of legal fees and also make the problem go away. So it seems to me that you ought to take at least serious consideration. You should find out what kind of deal they're offering or what kind of deal you could strike with them before you, because obviously we're getting close. We got a meeting on Friday, and then I think the 15th or so the lawsuit comes out of abeyance, and then it's time to really put the gloves on. So it seems, the old saying that nobody really wins in lawsuits except for the attorneys. So it just seems to me that would be a logical solution. So that's it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I'm not sure that we have much purveyance of that. It would be more the city manager and the city council would I'm sure they're looking into that. I hope.
May I ask you a question, if you know? When they're speaking about the assets, I think that pertains mainly to customers. Is that your understanding? Because my understanding is I think there's only one substation there. I mean, it's not equipment or hard assets per se.
Can you step up to the microphone, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
I would assume it to be the transmission and distribution assets. So the substation would be one thing, but the wires, the poles, all that sort of thing. I'm assuming. I don't know the details, but if and again, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know, but I would think that when if the town prevails.
Well, do you know who approached whom on that?
I think FPL. Mr. O'Connor could.
Yeah, Mr. O'Connor may be able to help us. You weren't here when he.
You weren't here for that.
What's the question?
No,
question.
I'm recommending that the town pursue the FPL offer to take the shores, to buy the shores business, essentially.
And that's fine, except that in my discussions with FP&L,
Well, yeah, why don't you get up and talk?
there are several major obstacles to that. One of those is that the ongoing liability exposure to whoever it is, how there would be a bond posted by the city of Indian River Shores, the town of Indian River Shores, for the next 50 years to protect us from their percentage responsibility of stranded cost. The second thing is we have a 69 line up there in a substation sitting in Indian River Shores. It's the backbone to our total system that gives us reliability. So we would have to work out some joint use of that with them. And then comes the fact that we would have to try to find what the value of the system is, assuming that they are going to purchase the wires and the poles and that kind of stuff. So you have three major components, plus I'm sure there are other details that would have to be addressed by the attorneys as we go through that process. But and another major factor, and the reason that I would have some real major concerns with this, we're actually being sued by two different groups. Excuse me, we're in mediation with two different groups. One is Indian River Shores, one is Indian River County. I don't think, in my opinion, and again, we could hire some attorneys to figure this out, I don't believe that you can treat Indian River Shores different than Indian River County. They are two different entities, but their goals and objectives are basically the same. And there's no way we could, well, I don't think there's any way, I guess there's a price for everything, but 62% of our customer base, in order to make sure that our residents in the City of Vero Beach are protected, could be a pretty astronomical number, especially with that ongoing liability and stranded cost. And in my conversations with Florida Power and Light, which actually took place in less than 45 minutes because I was between two different appointments, and Florida Power and Light called and said they just needed a minute of time, which typically is more than a minute when you get involved in the conversations. But we did not negotiate anything, nor did we come up with any numbers or transfer of assets or anything like that. This, again, was less than 45 minutes, and we covered two topics there. One is the standard topic: is there any way around the FMPA issue? And are they, have they found anything? And they haven't. And Chef and I talk about this all the time. He talks to the FP&L attorneys on a pretty regular basis, as well as the OUC attorneys. And so that's we've got to see if there's any way around that, because I think we all agree that would be the ideal scenario. And then the second topic that took place was the Indian River Shores, and that FP&L had been approached by folks in Indian River Shores about the acquisition of the assets. And I just said that, to me, that's a pretty heavy hill to climb. So,
well, Jim, are you saying this that it's like cutting the baby in half? Then that Indian River Shores could not be separate?
I'm saying it's impractical, because you could not separate Indian River Shores, in my opinion, from the same discussion that we're having with Indian River County. And together, those two entities form 62% of our customers. The city has gone out and obligated itself long-term to fill the capacity needs of 100% of our customers. If we divest ourselves of 62%, let's say, then the cost of our future exposure would have to be covered in some form or fashion, which would be a pretty astronomical number if you look at the fact that, those power plants could be around for another 30 to 40 years. And I'm saying that I don't think, in my opinion, and I'm not an attorney, that we could deal independently with Indian River Shores and not Indian River County, because we're both in the same mediation exercise.
Okay, thank you.
Well, anyway, Mike, they are talking.
Okay, I've got to make a couple comments. First of all, the notion of the stranded costs is nonsense as it relates to Indian River Shores. The City of Vero Beach made those contracts and those deals. All we are customers. We're just ratepayers. We have no long-term obligations other than to pay our bills. But also the separation, and again, I'm no attorney, but I would think that since the Shores was the primary instigator of this complaint, and the town or the county joined in with us, that carving us out is not that big a deal. That's just what I think. And number two, Jim alludes to the 62% as being a potential, I'll say, loss to the city. But the Shores is only 8.5%, something like that. And we've been told that we're insignificant in the whole grand scheme of things. So, you know, you could eliminate the lawsuit, you could get some money, and you could get rid of an insignificant sort of a bee in your bonnet, if you will, just by making the deal. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess there isn't any other comment, public comment. All right, we'll go on to new business. Do we want to do Chef? Do you want to do Randy? FMPA? What do we want to do here? Chef, why don't you start? You want to start?
I need to be excused for a moment because as I was sitting here, my brand new pair of readers broke. I have another pair in the car. I need to go get them. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to look at all the numbers and talk to you.
All right. Randy?
I'll be right back.
Could you be specific about what you want me to talk about? I mean, FMPA, but I mean, anything specific?
What is happening with FMPA as far as I'm concerned? Because I still have that letter that I would like the city council to send to all the other cities, and you don't want it sent. And so what I want to know is what is being done by the members at FMPA meetings that we shouldn't be sending that letter to all the others to tell them, hey, this is what FMPA should be doing instead of what they are doing, which doesn't seem to be doing anything as far as straightening themselves out.
Yeah. The audit came back. They replied to the audit, and they came up with a draft of a reply to the audit, and the board of directors and the audit committee and the executive committee went through the reply to the audit, and it's been sent to the general audit group. And basically it said, it didn't agree with everything that came from the audit, but basically it said that all the expense items, we really, we agree with that, we'll fix those things, and that's the Christmas tree and that sort of thing. The other areas, they said that they're past, there's new management, and that we don't want to get into those things in the future. Now, since that, and that same day that they answered that, they got into a long discussion about the swaps. And so they've liquidated 3 of the 9 swaps, and then this next meeting, they go after the other 6 swaps. And they're basically attached to a loan that's paid over a long period of time. And there's a debate about when the loan begins and ends, and that's what's going on. Basically, there's a tremendous amount of emotion coming from the cities saying, we really can't do this stuff anymore. We've really got to be careful going forward. We've got to really consider each thing we get into that's anything like this swap. So there's the discussion about the swaps has been extensive. I mean, I think I couldn't be there at the meeting, but I was on the call it was 6 hours long. And people are really taking it seriously. There's a lot of conscientious people within they're city people like us. And they were saying that we just can't have these losses. We can't have this loss of faith. And so I think they're really taking it seriously. They're really trying to do something. But it's a quandary as to what to do. In my mind, we have 3 choices of people that could represent us on the board there to help manage this enterprise. It's a person like me who doesn't have any experience that turns over every couple of years. It's somebody like Jim, who's city manager, who's got a bunch of experience in utilities, or it's Tom Richards, who's got a bunch of experience in utilities. Now, who's the right person to be in there, and how should this be managed? And so what I've done is I've written saying somebody ought to come in and tell us how to manage this thing, because it's complicated, and how do you manage it better than it's been managed in the past? How do you not make the big mistakes? And that's kind of where it stands right now. They haven't decided. This last meeting was so long that they didn't really get to next steps on management consulting or that sort of thing. That'll happen at the next meeting, and they'll handle the rest of the swaps at the same time, which is, I think, May 21st, I think, is the date. Yeah.
Well, how many? I've heard 44 swaps. You're talking about 9 swaps. How many swaps are there?
I haven't heard the 44. The 9 is the main made on the Taylor swaps. These are all called Taylor swaps.
Okay, that's 9 are the Taylor swaps.
Yeah,
but there are other swaps.
I don't know the other swaps. This was a concentration on the swaps that had to do with the Taylor thing that are underwater. That's the main focus of the audit and the focus of the committee right now.
Okay, now, to me, the main thing that the board ought to be looking at is, how do we get the debt down? Is there any talk about that, and how long that's going to take? The debt has to do with the purchase and the building of the utilities plants. You can't get it down any faster than the obligation we have right now, and those are debt repayment schedules that are in cement. Okay, the whole $2 billion is over just what we built.
Huh?
The $2 billion debt is what they built.
Right. Part of it is St. Lucie's. Part of it is the All Requirements project, and part of it is the 2 Stanton projects. Now, there is a tremendous amount of debt that runs off over the next, I'm going to say, 5 or 6 years, and Chef can be much more articulate on that than I am. But the Stanford 1 debt rolls off in a few years, and then there's a huge amount of debt that runs off on St. Lucie in, I think, 23. 178 million runs off at that time, which both things will effectively lower our rates a lot. So, but there's no way really to speed up the debt repayment. I mean, unless we want to pay more, and that means raising rates. So I don't see that there's a way to be able to do that.
Okay, I was just wondering if they had some kind of an idea of when and how long it's going to take.
Yeah. I think there's a
what they are, because we've never been told what they are.
We've never been told what.
What are the various sections of the debt? All we hear is, $2 billion, and that.
There's an annual audit done by a very good audit firm that goes through the debt repayment schedules on each one of the units. I've got a copy here. It's 180 pages long. It goes through in great detail what happens, and they're very forthcoming on all those numbers.
Okay.
I just thought I might help Chef Wright. I'm your utility lawyer. I just thought I might help out a little bit on the debt. The Stanton 1 debt is presently scheduled to roll off October 1st, 2019, so a little more than 4 years from now. That is, it is projected to be fully paid off by that date. There's actually some reserve money available that may make it possible to retire it earlier. That would be up to the project participants, including Vero Beach, and that's a decision that'll get made probably in a couple of years. But so Stanton 1, 19. I think St. Lucie rolls off in 2023. Stanton 2 rolls off in 2027. The other debt is not debt that affects the projects in which we are direct participants. It's debt largely for the ARP, the All Requirements project, and there may be some for the Tri-City project, which is a small 3-city project that we're not involved in either. The big debt for ARP is, well, there's shares of Stanton 2 and St. Lucie, but also the debt that FMPA has incurred to construct their power plants, the Cane Island power plants and the Treasure Coast power plant. I'm not sure when that rolls off. It's probably not until sometime later in the 20s or maybe even into the 30s. I'm not positive, but if it was 30 years financing and they built these in the early 2000s, it's probably going to be in the 2030s.
Okay, but is that part of our debt then?
No,
those two?
No.
Because we've been told $350 million
Yeah.
is what we owe FMPA if we wanted to get out, or 350 to 380 or something like that.
The only debt that we are liable for is the debt associated with the Stanton 2 and St. Lucie. The Taylor swaps is a separate issue. We are in conversations with FMPA as to whether we owe any part of the Taylor swaps or not, but there's no definition there. I do have to say this, though, just so that there's no misunderstandings. Getting out is not as simple as just paying off our debt.
Okay.
Because the debt is more complicated than that. Sorry.
My only other comment is that you said that it's very, very complicated and everything, and I'm not sure they haven't made it complicated so that people won't understand it, because why would it be so complicated? I mean, you either owe something or you don't owe it, and you got to pay it off or you don't pay it off.
The financials are not complicated. The financials, basically, our obligation is contractual. It's not so much dependent on the balance sheet. The balance sheet shows FMPA's investment in different projects. And we don't owe all of FMPA's investment in these projects. We just owe our share, which is teeny. But we owe, by contract, we owe purchases of power every year, every month. And we owe operating expenses. And we owe them to the close down of the plant plus the decommissioning at the end. And that's the obligation. Much more than the balance sheet, it's our contractual obligation to FMPA for these power plants we got into. And the notes and everything to it is what's complicated. Just trying to untangle it all. When it first was set up, it was a pass-through. It was everybody got together and you bought power, and there was some accountants basically that sort of passed out the expenses to each one of the cities. Then when the ARP got in, the All Requirements Project, everybody put their power plants into the mix, and it got much more complicated. And so that's how it's grown. But if you take the total FMPA expenses of their building and all the people in it and all that, it's 2% of the total cost. It's teeny. The cost really is the operating of each one of the plants and the purchase of the power. That's where all the money is, and that's where the expertise has to be gone into. And these judgments that were made that were incorrect were judgments at the time that really seemed smart, but they weren't.
Okay.
Well, is there any way to prevent that in the future?
We had basically the same discussion yesterday, and one of the this is the finance commissioner. One of the finance commissioners said, "How do you legislate against judgment? Mm-hmm. How do you make judgment correct? How do you put in place controls that make sure judgment is correct?" And not a very good answer. I just said you've got to dumb it down so that the judgment issue is not a complicated one. But that's about all I could think of. I mean, and that's what we're dealing with. These are big, long-term decisions and lots of money, and they're hard. They're hard, and a lot of skilled people involved in this, and we're the ones that are making these decisions. It's not some entity out there that's running amok. We've got all the decision power, and everything comes back to this committee, the board of directors and the executive committee that make the decisions. And so kind of we're responsible for getting ourselves into this mess. And it's not some group of people that are gunslingers.
Mm-hmm. Well, are most of the people who made the decisions still there today?
A lot of them are, yeah. And who are strongly trying to make sure that doesn't happen again. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because they're responsible to their cities just like we are.
Well, I'm just wondering, with your saying that you're not entirely comfortable with being on it in terms of being an elected official and the duration of your term versus a city manager or someone with an extensive technical background. But what I'm thinking is, if we don't have that, if we don't have someone such as yourself who's accountable to the public, then it seems that the alternative, and I'm not sure that that's a good one, is this oversight that's being suggested at this time. It hasn't been passed. I think Representative Mayfield has put forth some kind of idea of oversight. Right. So, do we need another layer? Isn't it better just to have someone who's accountable, to the community, than have this oversight? I know it's tough. I can feel it. I can feel that.
Dilemma. This is the dilemma. Here you have a very complicated set of business issues, and do you get a political decision to that? Do you get a political solution to that? And I'm saying, I don't think that's right. I think you want more business acumen in this than you want political oversight. Mm-hmm. These are complicated things, and
well, that's what I would think. I trust you to make the decision based on your getting advice from experts in the field.
Okay, so I'm not trying to say I'm exceptional or anything like that, but before I got elected, I spent a lot of time at FMPA, at OUC, with Tom Richards here. I went up and sat in on the meetings, and since then, I've gone through the audit with the finance director. Outside of the meetings up there, maybe 25 hours, something like that. And I don't feel comfortable making these decisions. I mean, these are tricky decisions. I have the best. I have the city in my mind as to making these decisions. Mm-hmm. But these swap decisions are tricky. Trying to get out of these things and doing it correctly are tricky. And they're not obvious, black white kind of decisions. And some of the decisions when they were made looked obvious. Looked really obvious. The swap decision, basically, when they got into the swaps for the Taylor swaps, they got interest below 4%, 3.5% was the effective interest rate. And Wall Street was saying to them, Wall Street advisors were saying, if you can get long-term money for 3.5%, take it and run with it, because you'll never see that again. And it went down from that. But they took it, and they all agreed. They all sat around and said, "Oh, we'll take it." So you're in this situation, and you try to do what's best, but sometimes it doesn't turn out to be best. And so what you always say is, "This looks too good to be true, so let's get out of it in a little while," or something. It's tricky. Yeah. And it's not people running away with our money. It's us trying genuinely to make the right decision in a complicated industry. Mm-hmm. And who is it that should be doing it? Mm-hmm. Is it me? Is it Jim? Should we have Shep with us all the time? Is it? Well,
I think it's just that the community needs some kind of accountability, and you're accountable being an elected official. But I know that most of the representatives on the FMPA are not elected officials. That's right. My understanding. The vast majority are not. And I guess that's why people are concerned and feel the need for additional oversight, which generally is not a good idea, adding layers, just generally speaking.
Yeah. Each city is making this decision themselves, and I don't think you can take that away from them. Each city is saying, okay, let's figure it out. Is it Jim, is it Tom, or is it me that should go? Mm-hmm. And we're saying, hey, which would represent us best? Mm-hmm. And every city's making a different choice or making their own choice, and they're not. The guy that's on there is not saying, "Hey, gee, this is a lot of fun. I'd like to stay here." It's not. It's a lot of work, and it's not. And it's not a lot of fun. And so each city is making that decision, and I don't think we can impose our idea of what every city ought to do on this. I think every city ought to do right, depending on their people, depending on the skills of the people.
Well, each city has a separate vote, right?
Yeah. Sorry, it was much too long.
Okay.
No, that's all right. Thank you.
Well, I just have one point to make. I feel like just one point I'd like to make is I feel like our city manager is also answerable to the public because he answers to the council. So if we chose to have our city manager, represent us on, I don't think we're giving up the fact that he's representing the public. So, and are you uncomfortable doing the job? I mean, are you recommending to us that we should?
No,
have
I'm
someone?
not. No,
Okay.
I'm not. But that would be a relief.
Well, just to go along with this,
Do we need mediation on this? I don't know.
I got.
I think we have attorneys here.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I got this forecast. The problem you've got is forecasting down the road. And it says the U.S. Energy Information Administration recently projected crude oil prices to be to 2040 to be between $76 a barrel and $252 a barrel. Now, how do you work with some kind of long-range forecast like that? You can't.
I think what I'm hearing in the discussions that have been going on about rates and what we would do if we were buying on our own is we would stagger a bunch of sort of 5-year contracts. So new contracts come up every couple of years, and so we're not taking any long-term risks and we're not really taking short-term risks, but we're staggering it, and so you can deal with that as it goes up and down. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Jim, do you want us to do Rob next or Chef next?
It makes really no difference. I guess Rob could go next if you wanted, but Chef sort of falls in line, I think, with your conversation with Randy.
Yeah, okay. Well, fine. Chef, do you want to?
Hello again. Thanks for having me. I'm always glad to be here. I'm Chef Wright, and I'm the city's utility special counsel. Here, I'm going to try to set the groundwork for where we are, and as an introduction to a conversation that we need to have about, we and the community need to have about policy decisions and decisions relating as Commissioner Moss and others were talking about, that relate to making major financial decisions that are going to affect the future for some period of years under conditions of anywhere from mild to extreme uncertainty. And that's what we're in. It's the context that we're in is talking about various power purchase options. Our horizon is somewhat shorter than the position that a utility company or a utility organization is in making a decision to build a 40-year power plant that's going to have a life of 40 years, but it's the same general principle. Things change. Markets change. A handful of people that we know of, Paul Krug, foresaw the housing bubble being a problem and foresaw the subprime mortgage market being a problem before 2008. But not a whole lot of people did. People were out there just borrowing money and doing everything, and things changed abruptly in 2008. But here's the context. Y'all have probably heard a lot of this, but it's probably worth doing it to lay groundwork. We are members of FMPA. We are participants in 3 FMPA projects, Stanton 2, and St. Lucie. Those are long-term power plant projects. Those power plants were good, specifically approved by the Florida Public Service Commission as needed and as cost-effective and as beneficial in terms of avoiding the additional consumption of oil in Florida at the time that they were approved I think all 3 of them were actually approved in the 80s. St. Lucie 2 might have been approved in the 70s. It came online in 84. But these were good projects. And similarly, the city's decision to join FMPA, or FMPA's decision to become a co-owner of the projects was a good decision, were good decisions. And our decisions to participate in those projects were good decisions. And they worked out great for years. With respect to those contracts, when the world changed in 2008, 2009, those contracts went from, looking real good to being rather grossly underwater. And we're not sure exactly how much, but what we do know is that even when we thought we could sell the system to FPL, and we're not giving up on it, but we don't see a way forward, frankly. But even to get that deal done, we were going to have to pay, or somebody was going to have to pay somebody to take those contracts off our hands. It's not like, oh, yeah, these are good contracts, you can have them. No. We're going to have to pay some non-trivial amount of money, tens of millions of dollars, to get people to take them off our hands. So that's one set of things, but that's really in the context of stuff that's set. In 2008, following a process that began at least as early as 2007 and may even have, actually it began before that, when the city decided earlier to get out of the All Requirements project. We gave our notice that we wanted to convert to a contract rate of delivery, and that got set at 0. We had to replace the power that we were otherwise obtaining through the All Requirements project. And to do that, we entered into a power purchase agreement with the Orlando Utilities Commission. That agreement was signed on April 21st, 2008, and it was a really good contract at the time it was entered into. It had capacity payments that were reasonable in light of the market, escalating, not out of line with what folks thought the capacity prices would be over time. OUC had and still has a good, beneficial mix of coal generation and gas generation. They have flexibility to go from approximately 70% gas-fired generation, 30% coal, to 70% coal, 30% gas, if the relative prices of coal and gas were to flip again. Gas is low. It's $2.55 a million BTU today. In April of 2008, it was passing through $9 on its way to $13.50, which it hit in June.
Isn't coal on the way to being phased out? Overall, In the long run, that certainly appears to be the scenario, unless there are technologies to make it clean, and unless there Would that be within the next 10 years, if you know?
No. Not in 10 years, and unless it were to remain cost effective under whatever future carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, regulatory regime ultimately gets imposed, whether it's the Clean Energy Plan and how that gets implemented, whether it's a set of emission allowances, and if it's a set of emission allowances, then the question is, what's an allowance going to cost? It's a big difference if it's $10 a megawatt hour or $50 a megawatt hour. And nobody knows what it's going to be, and nobody really knows when it's going to be. I will try to give you a more complete answer right now. A number of coal plants are being shut down. Generally speaking, they are older coal plants. In Florida, we have the Crystal River 1 and Crystal River 2 power plants that are owned by Duke Energy Florida that are scheduled to be retired in 2020. They were constructed respectively, I believe, in 1968 and 1972. They're old, and just economically, to meet the new non-carbon, but the new maximum achievable control technology and MATS, the air toxic standards. To meet those, they just determined it would cost too much to make it worthwhile to keep them running. They're shutting down. Gulf Power Company's Smith plant coal units in Panama City are in the process of shutting down. There are a number of other coal plants in the United States that are in the process of shutting down in this general time frame. There are a bunch more coal plants in the United States that are running and will continue to run. As far as I know, as we sit here today, the Tampa Electric's 4 units at Big Bend, Duke's other 2 newer coal units at Crystal River, units 4 and 5, the Stanton units, and Seminole's Palatka units, and JEA, the joint JEA FPL owned, mostly owned by JEA, St. John's River Power Park units, are all expected to keep running. Most, if not all of those, as far as I know. as far as I know, all of them, with the possible exception of Stanton 1, have done all the environmental upgrades that they need to do, and they foresee running for another whatever, whether it's 10 years or 15 or 20 or 25, but for some significant period of time, way more than 10 years. Now, there are other coal plants around the country that are being shut down and that are vulnerable to having to be shut down just because the economics will change. And as I said, back to the theme of decision making big, important, expensive decisions under conditions of uncertainty, the decisions are going to change depending on whether there's a carbon regulatory regime imposed. Almost everybody I know, including myself, believes that there will be one. When? Nobody has any idea. People I talk to say, we'll be surprised if it's before 2025, although it could be sooner. There's a proposed standard for 2020, but who knows what's happening there. And what's it going to look like? And nobody knows what that is. Like I said, if it's an emission allowance system like we have for SO2 and nitrogen oxides, that's fine. Then, as a former economist, I'll tell you that's the right way to do it, because that'll get you the cost-effective reallocation of who should be running what and who should be shutting down what or not running what. But again, you don't know if it's going to be a $10 a megawatt hour hit, or if it's going to be a $20 megawatt hour hit, or a $50 megawatt hour hit. So that's kind of that's what we call at my house the chef answer on the future of coal plants.
Well, the Department of Energy just put out on April 22nd that they have stored 10 million metric tons of carbon dioxide by using carbon capture and storage, and they're working on this. And if it works, and it, like anything technological, hopefully the cost will come down. Coal will still be good.
It could be. It sure could be. Yeah. So.
If I may, just a second. Can you clarify for me something? Most of the costs and most of the expenses FMPA incurs are related to power generation. There are technical requirements which govern how those decisions are made and so on. Am I correct in saying that the Taylor swaps were basically just financial manipulations trying to generate cash that could be used to offset those power costs?
I do not believe that is a correct statement. I believe the correct statement is something like this. The Taylor swaps were entered into as an interest rate hedge, a financial hedge to preserve FMPA's opportunity to borrow money at what was then, at the time the swaps were executed, believed to be long-run favorable interest rates that would be used initially in contemplation of the construction of the Taylor Energy Center, the coal plant near Perry that never got built. It was in, depending on how you look at it, you could say it was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but it was in the process of getting permitted when Governor Christ took office, and he said, we're not having any more coal plants, basically. His policies, we're not having any more new coal plants in Florida, and that was the end of that. But that's what it was incurred. It was incurred to preserve long-term financing capability for new construction.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So, back to, did you have a question?
Well, I just maybe have a comment, because I was fortunate to be able to tune in on a webinar. Well, it was actually a meeting that I was able to watch through the web. And it was the Conservation and Renewable Energy Advisory Committee of FMPA. Do you follow those?
I am sorry to say that I don't. I have my plate very overflowing.
Yes. Well,
Thank you.
It was an interesting meeting, and I do have a copy of it if anyone on the committee wants to. I have a disc of the meeting, so if anyone wants to tune in. But they predicted, they were had a lot of discussion about these EPA requirement changes by 2030. And
actually, I did see the PowerPoint of that presentation, I think. Go ahead.
Okay. And what it was going to cost FMPA. projecting what their carbon emissions were going to have to reduce to and so forth. And one thing that I thought was really interesting was that they were promoting each of the cities to promote net metering as a way to help offset some of these carbon emissions.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's something we can be doing here in the city too. We have a good net metering program, right? That we could promote.
Actually, we don't have one.
Yeah, we do.
I was going to say, I do not believe that we presently have a net metering tariff. I know about these things, and I'm
Okay.
happy to work with Mr. Richards
Okay.
on that, but I don't believe we have one today. So back to where we are today. The OUC contract, the 2008 OUC contract, was a good contract when we entered into it. Like the other contracts, when the world changed in 08-09, it too became economically unattractive, to be candid. Current capacity costs are a lot less. This year, our capacity cost is, I think, $13,205 a megawatt month, or $13.21 a kilowatt month. Current capacity costs are 6, 5.5, something like that, possibly less, possibly a little more. And the energy costs are what they are, but when the price of gas fell through the floor, we have so much efficient natural gas-fired generating capacity in Florida. I don't even 25,000 megawatts, plus or minus. Our total generation system in Florida is around 70,000 megawatts. 25,000 megawatts of that is highly efficient gas-fired combined cycle generation. It may even be a little bit more than that, and that percentage is growing. When you're able to run a gas plant with $2.50 gas, or even call it $4 gas delivered, all in, including the transportation at the burner tip in the power plant, you're looking at a power cost of something like $28, $28, $29, $30 a megawatt hour. That's 2 or 3 cents, roughly 3 cents, 3.3, 3.2, whatever, 3 cents a kilowatt hour. That's really cheap, folks. The blended cost from OUC with coal and gas, they've got 30% coal, is a bit higher than that. They're kind of in the mid-30s right now, $34, $35, $36. So where we are is we have this contract with OUC. Your hired consulting experts on this, which is myself and my colleague, Mr. Harrington, have been tasked with trying to renegotiate or obtain from OUC proposals for revisions to our existing PPA, and that we have done. And we've talked about that at several council meetings through continuing diligent efforts by both sides. And I'll say OUC has been very cooperative and helpful and forthcoming in all of these discussions. And Bill and I and Mr. O'Connor have been diligent on our side. We've got proposals from OUC, the latest proposal from OUC, which is significantly, dramatically really, better than the existing contract. We have also evaluated, because it's part of our due diligence inquiry to do this, we've also evaluated what would happen if there are a lot of people who are not really excited about this, but if we were to endeavor to terminate or default on our contract with OUC, and if it became legally required to pay damages, we're not conceding that at this time, but if it were to become required, we did the analysis. What would it cost to go to the market and buy power going forward? And so we've had several presentations to council on this subject, just to go over the guts of the last OUC term, the newest, most improved OUC terms. They would shorten our existing contract, which presently expires at the end of 2029, to expire at the end of 2023. They would significantly reduce the capacity payments, capacity rates. they would sell us some peaking capacity, which has some benefits to us because it would enable us to retire Big Blue. And by retiring Big Blue, we save $4.1 million a year that it currently costs in long-term fixed costs to keep that plant running. And then there's some additional costs beyond the fixed O&M costs just to keep it running, which we estimate best we can at being in the ballpark of $1,200,000 a year in major maintenance, major capital replacement on an ongoing basis, even if we shut down 1, 3, and 4, or 3 and 4, and in which we've shut down 3. We're in the process of shutting down 4. But if we kept 2 and 5 running, it's still a lot of money. You got to have the employees there. You got to have everything there to keep the plant running. But so that's part of the offer. They most recently agreed to allow us to reduce our peak demand for purposes of computing our billing demand, and that saves us another $1.1 million, $1.2 million a year, increasing over the 8 years of the new offer. And they agreed to give us an extra $500,000 a year discount for each of 2016, 17, and 18. We said, can you please do it a little better? And they said, yeah, this is what we can do. So that's where we are. And with that, I'd like to invite you to turn to the last sheet in the packet that you got, the big 11 by 17 deal. Yeah, well. Excuse me, I have just been advised that I told you something that was not true, and that is we do indeed have net metering, and we do have customers on it, and we report to the PSC.
We have different usage rate when you go above a certain amount, but we don't have net metering as to when it is, what time of day
No, we do not have time of day.
No, we don't have time of day.
We just have net metering of primarily solar at this particular time.
Yeah. Just for clarity, net metering works like this. If you are a net metering customer, you have solar. During the daytime, your solar equipment may well generate more kilowatt hours than you use during the daylight hours. And if that's the case, then what happens is, by electrical magic, the extra kilowatt hours flow back into the grid to the utility, and they go to your neighbors realistically, because it's a pressure kind of thing. But your meter will register the fact that you put more kilowatt hours out during the daylight hours than you used, and then those kilowatt hours are later used to offset your usage at night when, of course, the sun's not shining. And that's what the net metering is you're then billed for the net of what you use over and above the total of what you generated with your solar. That's what net metering is. So if you generated, let's just say if you generate 1,000 kilowatt hours a month and use 1,100, you pay for 100 kilowatt hours to the utility. If you generate 1,000 and use 900, then you've got a surplus of 100. The PSC rules that are applicable to the investor-owned utilities require that be trued up on an annual basis. So at the end of the year, if you've generated an extra 1,000 kilowatt hours over and above what you used, including both daytime and nighttime usage, then you get paid that at the utility's cheap rate, which is like 4 cents. But that's what net metering is. It's not inherently time of use billing. But it's just a netting of total solar generation or other renewable, if you have such, against what you used. Okay. So this summary sheet at the end shows 4 cases. The base case is to stick with the existing OUC contract. And just reading across that first line, you'll see that the first column that says total BPS costs, that stands for bulk power supply, 2016 to 2029 is $1.062 billion over the 14 years, 2016 through 2029. That's a nominal total. The next column is the present value total using the city's discount rate, 4.16%, as approved by the finance director, and that's $782.4 million. The next three cases look at alternatives. If you look, let's kind of take them in chronological order. Alternative case 3 was the first offer that OUC made to us back in October, and you'll see that the total nominal cost over the whole period is $1.010 billion. The NPV, net present value, is $748 million. So that case is some in present value terms, which is really the standard metric that is typically used by pretty much every utility for making decisions of this sort, is a benefit of $34 million. OUC then, in November, after some discussions here, we went back to OUC and said we would be very interested in a shorter-term contract, and they came back with their proposal to terminate the contract in 2023 and some other provisions. And you see in that scenario, the nominal total's only $893 million, net present value $663 million, such that that's almost $120 million to the good versus the current base case. And I do want to point out that the last phrase in the description of alternate case 2 says market purchases 2024 through 2029. Under this scenario, and also under the alt case 1, which I'll talk about in a moment, we would have, under this scenario, we would buy power from OUC pursuant to the proposed amended contract through 2023. To make it apples to apples, we have to come up with an estimate of what it would cost us to buy power for 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, and 29, and that is all factored in here. It's simply the assumptions are that we will buy power at the estimated / projected market costs for 2024 through 2029. So these numbers are apples to apples numbers over the 14-year period. Finally, we looked at...
Would you just clarify? So, in fact, the contract, that November 25th contract, is to 20 what date?
December 31, 2023.
23.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's
I see it here now. Okay.
Okay. And then finally, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, as part of our due diligence, it was suggested that we ought to look at what would happen if we were somehow able to terminate the contract with OUC. And under a scenario, and again, we're not conceding liability as a legal matter, that's lawyer speak for you, but we're not conceding the liability to pay the damages, but we feel appropriate to make the assumption that we would have to pay damages for purposes of evaluating the scenario. If we pay $50 million in damages, retire the plant, and go to the market starting January 1st of next year and buy at market costs through the period, we would save somewhat more money, even having paid the $50 million in damages. And you can see, looking to the right-hand column, as opposed to savings of about $120 million with the OUC November 25th offer, that the go-to-market scenario, even assuming that we would pay damages on an as-sustained basis, it has an NPV of about $165 million. So where we are today is to really to have this conversation with y'all as the Utilities Commission of the City of Vero Beach as to what you think we ought to do. As most of y'all have seen me a few times, if not more than that, and you probably get tired of hearing me say this, but there are a lot of moving parts, and there are risks no matter what you do. If you go to market, you're exposing yourself to market risk. If you stick with the OUC 8-year deal, you're still going to be exposed to the market risk from 24 on, and you're taking a risk that you might wind up paying more than you might otherwise have to, depending on what market costs do in the meantime. Maybe in the simplest terms, taking the OUC deal, you're taking a sure thing as to what your capacity rates will be, and you're buying good protection on fuel price volatility, particularly with respect to the price of natural gas. If the price of natural gas goes crazy, and there's ample historical precedent for it doing so. There was a big spike in 2002, 2005, and 2008. If the price of gas goes crazy, OUC can flip its generation from 70% gas, 30% coal to 70% coal, 30% gas, and that provides non-trivial risk protection against the volatility of natural gas prices. On the other hand, if everything goes along the way it's presently going, the hydraulic fracking, recovery of natural gas holds up, and the price of natural gas stays low, and you stick with the OUC deal, there's a good chance that, that's what this analysis shows, actually, that there's a good chance you'll wind up paying more for the power than you would otherwise have to if you were to go to market. So, and there's a lot of moving parts. We've got three power plants, and things happen.
I can see that there are a lot of variables here,
yes,
and even more numbers behind them.
Mm-hmm.
But before you said anything to paper, did you have an underlying set of assumptions? Did you have something in mind that you based all of this on, all the variables and all the numbers? Did you have a set of assumptions, just basic assumptions going forward? And I know it's hard to know the future. We've talked about that already.
I'll invite Brother Harrington to join me up here. But the answer is yes.
Could you state them for me, since I'm new to the group? How many are there?
Well, it's even slightly more complicated than that. There are a good number of assumptions, but also they change because during this whole process, the market moves around, and we, Bill, are continually updating things based on the newest information. The price in the fall, the price of gas was one thing, and then it dropped, and then it stabilized, and it increased a little bit, and then more recently it dropped 60 cents from $3.15, $3.20 down to $2.55, $2.60, and so and so we are continually doing that.
Well, I ask because because it's long term. I know things change probably even moment to moment, but because it's the nature of the commitment is long term. I'm wondering if there were basic underlying assumptions.
The list is probably long, but here goes. We assumed that we would remain in the FMPA contracts. We assumed that the costs would be as shown here, which are obtained from FMPA as to their projected costs. And for example, they do reflect the roll-off of the Stanton 1 debt in fiscal 2020. By the way, October 1st, 2019 is the first day of fiscal 2020, which is why that shows in 2020. We assumed, if you look under if you look at the top section, that's system load data. That shows what our assumed projected peak demands, winter and summer, and then what our average load would be, what our energy load, the term NEL stands for net energy for load.
I'm sorry, which page are you on now?
I flipped to the first page now.
Oh, okay, thank you.
If you look at this top section here that says system load data, NEL is the total energy that we buy. Now there are losses from that, and that'll eventually wind up as a that's the amount we have to buy in order to sell the retail megawatt hours or kilowatt hours we have to sell. And you'll see there's an assumption that our system losses are 4.5%, and then into the production model, the next block is the global, what Bill has headed global inputs, and that shows transmission losses, which we do have to factor into that because we take the energy at a delivery point, and there's transmission losses on OUC's transmission system and transmission losses on FPL's system, natural gas prices, gas transportation costs, and coal prices, and that the gas and coal translate into an estimated OUC system fuel cost. So those are all assumptions. And then we've got this is for the existing case, but you continue on. I said earlier we've got the Stanton, the FMPA assumptions. That's that first big yellow block. Then under the OUC existing contract, we've got the demand rates that are embedded in the existing PPA, the contract capacity, and the various rates. And then the FPL transmission is assumed to be what it is. And then down at the bottom, we've got a bunch of assumptions about the Vero power plant, because under this scenario, we keep the Vero power plant operating. Mm-hmm. And if you'll just flip to the next sheet, it's pretty much the same as the first one, except where you had the OUC PPA block about halfway down. Now it says BPS market supplier, and this scenario would have us going to the market. And so this shows what we would be buying in the market, the assumed demand charge rates, the assumed energy charge rates, the assumed fuel charge rates, the amount of energy we'd be buying from the market, and so on. So that's most of them, but in addition to that, there are also escalation rates built into all this over the time horizon.
Let me just add to Chef's answer is very complete. There's two assumptions that basically alter this analysis, and those are the price of power in the market. That's monitored weekly. There's people going out for bid as we speak. We get the results of those bids, and we factor that into the other one is fuel prices. I think we handle that well, in that although Chef has distributed this what we call the low gas case, low gas prices, but in fact we have two other sets of identical worksheets that have mid-price gas and high-price gas. Our current feeling is that our low gas scenario most accurately reflects the current situation, so we're kind of considering that our base analysis, and that's why he distributed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
So we go out and buy on the market, we still pay. We're talking about shorter term contracts, but we still pay demand charges.
Almost certainly, which is to say this: the normal structure of a bulk power supply contract has 2 or 3 components to it. A demand charge based on the capacity that you're buying, a fuel energy charge, basically the cost of the fuel and the little bit of variable O&M, like the chemicals that treat the water and stuff like that. And then sometimes there's also a non-fuel O&M charge. So where the fuel charge is maybe $27 or $28 a megawatt hour, the non-fuel operating and maintenance expense charge is something like $3. So there's typically those 3 charges. That can be just 2. It can be just a demand charge and an all-in energy charge. Then there's also transmission charges. But to give you the complete answer, there are contracts available, and you can even solicit bids for power purchases that are structured on an all-in dollars per megawatt hour basis. And there are utilities in Florida and other independent power producers for that matter, who will offer delivered power on an all-in dollars per megawatt hour basis. Typically, they have demand charges and energy charges, yes.
And they get their coal. Do you know where they get their coal from? I take it's probably from local because of
The market is changing. When the plant was built, and really up to very recently, they got the bulk of their coal from the Appalachian Basin, and now the coal from the far west Powder River Basin.
They do Powder River?
It's much cheaper, but gee whiz, you pay a lot of transportation getting in here.
And transportation is getting worse because there's so many now oil cars on the railroads.
You typically have long-term rail contracts, and they have escalators built in them. So you link your coal supply contract with the rail contract, obviously. But I would not say that the cost of rail transportation has gone up. Well, it's gone up significantly over the last 20 years, but in the last couple of years since the oil fracking boom, it takes different type of cars and that kind of stuff.
Right, but you still got the same rails.
Same rail, that's correct. And you got Warren Buffett out there moving it around.
Mr. Chairman.
All right. Yes?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm just curious why one of your assumptions isn't this new EPA rule. I would think that this new EPA rule will have tremendous impact on a lot of decisions that are going to be made by FMPA and all the other power producers. Like, I understand that government agencies have to start reducing their electric energy usage by 10% next year. I mean, the new EPA rule is going to be finalized in June of this year. So wouldn't that be something that would be calculated in as an assumption? Like, what if OUC decides they have to shut down Stanton 1, the coal-powered plant? Wouldn't that be a big deal?
Well,
They have shut it down most of the time.
I mean, I'm really new at this,
sure.
so,
No,
okay.
That's a completely fair question.
Okay.
We have not assumed costs built into this. Beyond that, though, like I said, nobody knows. That's not a crazy assumption. It would not be a crazy assumption to build something in starting in 2020. The question then is, what's it going to be? Is it going to be $10 a megawatt hour for coal and $4 a megawatt hour for gas? Those are good numbers, by the way, because typically a gas-fired combined cycle plant emits around 40% the amount of CO2 that a coal plant emits per megawatt hour. So if you assume the value, the allowance cost on a dollars per megawatt hour basis for coal was 10, and for gas was 4, you could build that in. Nobody really knows if that's going to be in place in 2020. I mean, I know the EPA rule says there's going to be a standard for Florida to meet whatever it is, 780 pounds per megawatt hour or something like that, or gigawatt, I'm not sure, by 2020, but it's not clear that that's really going to be the deal. Now, if they shut down Stanton, that's a whole, that changes things for us. We would just have to see how that works out. If everything were to go, if you assume that they were going to shut down Stanton, jump in any time. But I think it's right. If they were to shut down Stanton, and they don't shut it down until 2020, the debt's paid off in 19. Probably all that we're really on the hook for at that point as a project participant in the Stanton project is the decommissioning and retirement costs, which realistically is probably not going to be that much. Is that right so far? Okay. Now, beyond that, if you were to assume that something was going to be in effect in 2020, it would have some effect at shifting things. It would cause OUC's all-in energy price to be proportionally somewhat higher than the market cost, based on the completely reasonable assumption that in the vast majority of hours, the market energy price is going to be driven by gas-fired combined cycle generation at an efficient heat rate. Do you have an opinion on whether that would change the results?
Well, what about building new facilities? What about building new, I mean, why would OUC not decide they're going to build new solar facilities, for example?
First, let me just say in general to your first question.
Okay.
To me, there's quantitative analysis and then there's qualitative judgment.
Okay.
I'm happy to leave the qualitative judgment to Chef and y'all and that kind of stuff. But Chef's exactly right. If he says, Bill, let's model in the carbon thing, I would have no clue how to model it in. You talk to some people, they say this new law has a snowball's chance in hell of ever being affected. You talk to other people, it's going to be worse than what the law actually says. So I could not model that in. I think the thing is when we do this type of quantitative analysis, you start looking at the results. If they're close, then these qualitative considerations can swing us one way. If it's left field and right field, well then, you tend to disregard the qualitative issues. I'm sorry, Chef, go.
No, don't
Well,
apologize.
if the EPA, as you were saying, tells the people they got to cut their use, you're going to have more excess capacity then. And so the price of
40% of the power in this country is generated by coal plants.
And so the price should drop somewhat on the market.
Well, I don't know.
That's right, and that consideration as kind of an alternative sensitivity, increased solar generation at the end use level, for example, or increased conservation at the end use level. You make those assumptions, that will, other things equal, that's economists speak, that will soften the demand market, which would push projected capacity charges lower. It would also have a very slight damping effect on the energy cost, because as you generate electricity, your overall cost is going to be, the cost per megawatt hour is going to be slightly less, because when you generate, you put on the cheapest stuff first, then the next cheapest, then the next cheapest, then the next cheapest. And if you're taking it off the top end of that, you're taking off the high marginal cost stuff, and you're going to save a little money. So yeah, that would damp market costs. In terms of constructing new facilities, what's it going to be? Is it going to be, I mean, we've got 1,600 megawatts of, no, more than that. 1,600 plus megawatts of gas-fired combined cycle capacity coming on next year at Port Everglades. We've got another, FPL is projecting another 1,600 megawatts at Okeechobee in 19, another 1,600 megawatts at another site in 21. Duke's bringing 1,600 megawatts of new efficient gas-fired combined cycle capacity online at its new citrus plant in 2018. There's going to be a lot of gas capacity. And the solar thing is the solar prospects are a wild card in two respects. One,
Or what?
are a wild card in two respects. Mm-hmm. One, at utility scale, the prices are getting really low. Mm-hmm. And the developers will come put them in and sell you the power. Bill was just showing me, right as we were sitting here before the meeting started, he was showing me a summary of the bids that JEA got, and they're 5.1, 5.4, 5.58, 6, 6.5. There's some high ones. There's some that are 11 cents. But there's a lot. I mean, they got a lot of megawatts offered, built by the developer, selling the electricity for 5, 5.5, 6 cents a kilowatt hour. And that's utility scale. On the customer side of the meter, you've got end-use development. And the price of solar is coming down. Right. The price of the battery technology is only getting better. Mm-hmm. For now, having your solar system and taking the rest of your needs from the grid is the economic choice in almost all cases. I know a couple of people live off grid houses, but price of batteries, say, is $1,000 a watt, $1,000 a kilowatt. If that drops to 50 cents a watt, that's going to make it more economic. But all that softens the market, and that sort of judgmentally, as Bill was saying, all that would tend to indicate that the go-to-market scenario is probably better, just based on that consideration. The real risk, straight up, the real risk in going to market is something bad happens with fracking, and the price of gas jumps from $3 to $12. Now, in the long run, probably, this, feel free, Bill, but in the long run, I'm around this stuff a lot, and I do what I do, but in the long run, it is believed by smart people, former deputy secretaries of energy, et cetera, in the long run, it is believed that the international supply of liquefied natural gas from other countries would probably suppress the price back to something like $7, $8 a million BTU. So if we had the bad fracking goes wrong, big price spike, other supply will come back in because it's not economic for a producer in Saudi Arabia or wherever else to liquefy the natural gas and ship it over here and sell it for $2.55 a million. That doesn't work. But at $6, it's good. It's $7, whatever it is. But that's the real market exposure that we have.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
One final comment. One of your assumptions was that peak, because you're buying it at peak, right? Your peak load.
Well, you
Peak demand.
the peak.
Assumed peak demand. That was one of your assumptions.
Correct.
Okay, so if there was a input of solar, for example, that would has the potential of reducing peak demand.
Yes.
So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, and not only solar, but also what we call non-firm service, which is interruptible or curtailable service, where a customer could say, well, if you'll give me a discount, I'll agree to either turn on my own generation or just invoke my internal load management system and reduce my load by 400 kilowatts or 1,000 kilowatts or whatever when you tell me I need to do it. And we've actually talked about that, and in our latest proposal from OUC, they agreed to let us actually reduce our peak demand as the starting point for determining our billing demand by 10 megawatts, which saves us 11 megawatts off the billing demand, because when you factor in reserves, you get that extra 15%, and that saves us $1.1 million, $1.2 million, $1.3 million a year over the time horizon.
I guess the question is it low enough if we, do something to promote solar, for example, locally?
Yeah,
When you're negotiating with OUC, are these issues in play? Or do you talk about solar? When you're negotiating with them, the different scenarios?
No, we talk about our billing demand, which is the basis upon which what we would pay them it's a basis for what we pay them. Mm-hmm. We don't really talk directly about solar, but we do talk about the idea that when we get them to agree to reduce our peak demand and thus our billing demand by 11 megawatts, we said we will work on implementing an interruptible or curtailable type service to make sure that when we tell you our demand is going to be 84 megawatts and not 95 megawatts, that's what it'll be. And that they extracted from us, this is verbal and not yet reduced to a formal agreement, but they said there's going to be a penalty to you.
Well,
and if you go over, we're going to hit you with a
I guess
surcharge.
I was just wondering what you use when you negotiate with them to, I can see that you've received concessions, I guess you might call them, from them. What do you use, to strong arm them, if you do? How do you negotiate with them?
Well, it just depends. On the peak demand, we said, here's our billing demand history for the last 3.5 years. The highest we hit was 164 megawatts in February of 2010. And they said, well, but in 2008, you hit 205. And we said, well, we don't think we're likely to hit that, and we are asking you to please reduce our billing demand because we are in a difficult posture in terms of our due diligence evaluation of various options.
So you're basing it on historical precedents?
On the peak demand piece, yes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And on the dollars, we're just saying, guys, we got a problem, and we respectfully are seeking some help here. And they said, well, we'll see what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we went with number one, do we have connections that we can get the power in here presently? Or do we have to do something like FP&L was going to have to do a substation if they took over us and they were going to bring in lines?
I think I have to say we're not 100% sure about that, but we are 100% sure that by some reasonable point in time, which might be as much as 2 years out, it might be a whole lot less than that, transmission capacity would be made available because the transmission utilities, FPL principally, are obligated to construct if any construction is necessary. We do have a pending transmission service request with FPL to accommodate an additional 50 megawatts of deliveries from OUC, because part of the proposal from OUC is to buy 54 megawatts of peaking capacity from FPL. Now, part of that's already covered by what we have available, but in the longer run, as our load ramps up, we have to get that. So that's pending, and FPL has said, Our initial evaluation indicates that we need to do a more detailed engineering system impact study. We've paid the deposit on that. FPL is in the process of doing that. Exactly when and whether any upgrades would be necessary and when it could all be delivered would depend in part on who was going to be if we were to take alternative one and go to the market, it would depend on who the supplier was going to be. If we went to the market, settled everything with OUC, and OUC were to bid, we'd still have to be in exactly the same situation, having to get the additional transmission capacity. If FPL was the successful bidder in this hypothetical RFP, might or might not. They might. They might have to upgrade. I understand that there's discussion about putting in a big new transformer at one of the transmission subs south of town. That might have to be accomplished. How long that would take, I don't know. I've heard that it's out there, and so it might not take all that long. But the answer, Herb, is we don't know exactly, but we do know it would be available at some point.
So we couldn't really take down the power plant until that was all done. Correct. Yeah, because we have
we got 50.
We got 50 megawatts.
Correct. We have to have sufficient capacity, sufficient deliverable capacity under contract or operable capacity at the power plant to meet our generation obligations. That's correct.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Orcutt, you mentioned that FMPA was talking about encouraging people to go to net metering. Did they explain why they thought that was an advantage? I mean, were they saying that people should be looking at individual solar generation rather than relying on public utility?
Well, because they're anticipating this EPA deadline approaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so they know that the carbon emissions are going to have to be met. And the FMPA, they had some numbers out there for where they stood now, and it was a very low number as far as something like less than 1% of the zero emissions production that we're going to need. I mean, so they were saying that it would be good if the cities encouraged net metering, because that helps account, because all of the net metering gets reported to the Public Service Commission. Is that the right name of that agency?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks. And so that is accountable. It gives you little chits that you're doing the right thing. The more solar you have, earns credits.
And were they talking at all about doing something to encourage people to switch to solar?
They were going to put a white paper together about how to build a community solar project where it makes sense for the utility and makes sense for the community. So, I'm really new at this, but I'll be happy to share this with you, and you can get up to speed.
Okay. I'm going to refer this now back to Mr. Wright. It seems to me that all of your thinking has been about conventional electric power generation, gas, coal, nuclear, whatever it might be, transmission contracts, and so forth. Are there any wild cards that are foreseeable? And I will give you an example. I have received a number of times over the last year proposals from utilities out in the Midwest and out west to sell solar power directly to the consumer, presumably feeding that power into the grid, and once it's in the grid, it's fungible. Who knows where the electron comes from? But the question is always, who's going to fix the final charge at based on the meter? this is something that is obviously potentially a very, very big factor in future power negotiations. That if they can generate power, as you said, at possibly half the price of conventional power and feed it into the grid, thereby relieving FPL, for example, or FMPA or OUC of the need to generate that power, will consumers be able to take advantage of that, or is there going to be some regulatory blocks put on that at the behest of the utilities? In other words, we need to think a little bit outside of the conventional box of power generation, because in the final analysis, I don't care if my money goes to OUC or FPL or FMPA. I want to get the biggest or the largest number of kilowatts at my meter for the dollars that I spend. And it seems to me that there is an industry building out there, which is going to force some of that to happen. And I know it's speculation, but there's a lot of speculation been going on already. So, do you have any feelings about that?
Yes, and I have knowledge and information about it in addition to feelings.
Good.
Here's what. If I were, just to crack a little joke, if I were going to put on my lawyer hat, I would object to the form, because that was a rather extensively compound question. But I'm going to try. I'm kidding around. I'm going to try to address as much as I can of what you brought up, George. As we sit here today, there are insurmountable, rock-solid regulatory blocks against transactions of the type you describe. And that is only the utility who's presently serving in a PSC-approved service territory, approved pursuant to a territorial agreement, can sell power to the customers in that area. A utility in Georgia, or a wind generator in West Texas, or a hydroelectric generator in Minnesota or Maine or wherever, cannot sell to a customer in Florida without becoming a public utility under Florida law, and that then subjects them to territorial dispute regulation, which the incumbent utility, whether it was JEA or OUC or Vero Beach or Florida Power and Light or Duke or anybody else, would win. I'll just tell you that straight up. That's not happening today. That's not happening next year. It's not happening in 2017. Could it conceivably happen in the 2020s? Maybe, on the regulatory side. But then you've got, from there you go to a bunch of more technical problems, and that is you still have to have adequate generation capacity to make sure that the lights stay on. And that invokes questions, one, of how are you going to make sure that the wind power that's generated in West Texas is backstopped by capacity in Florida. And, of course, the utilities in Florida who own that capacity are going to say, well, we have to get paid to have our capacity available to run, a completely reasonable position. Mm-hmm. And we've only got about 3,600 megawatts, maybe 3,800 megawatts, it's that order of magnitude, of import capability in Florida. Now, you can, it's kind of like wholesale net metering. You can put the power on the grid here and there and back off here, but at the end of the day, you can only push 3,800 megawatts under first contingency conditions, 3,800 megawatts from Georgia and Alabama into Florida. That's it. So that's a real problem too. But to take it a step further, though, and I don't know if this is where you're going, but it's certainly a logical next step. What about additional renewables in Florida? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the part of the answer is the same thing that I said at the outset. Today, you cannot. Son Edison would love, I just love, to come into Florida and put solar on your roof and this roof and the big box stores' roofs and the little box stores' roofs and sell them electricity under a long-term power purchase agreement at a fair price that both parties would agree to. Can't do it. Why? Because they would become a public utility under Florida law at minimum, and probably only, but still it's significant enough to really count. They would become a retail seller of electricity. They'd be a public utility. They'd be subject to territorial regulation. And let's say say Sun Edison comes in and says, we want to put 500 kilowatts on the roof of Target and sell the output to Target under a power purchase agreement. Target, of course, would love this because I'm sorry, I shouldn't say Target. I should use a different example. I should use the, I will say generically, commercial customers are strongly in favor of retail choice. I represent the Florida Retail Federation. I can speak authoritatively on that subject. Let's say it's the Bill and Chef department store. They want to come put 500 kilowatts on the roof of the Bill and Chef department store, and we say, come on down. They come try to do it, and let's just say we're in Tampa Electric service area. We're in Tampa. Tampa Electric says, you can't do that. You're a utility. This is our territory. They run to the PSC, file a territorial dispute complaint against against the Sun Edison in this hypothetical, and the PSC says, you're right, Tampa Electric, this is your service area. Sun Edison, you really, we're going to rule in Tampa Electric's favor because these people have been here serving for years. They are best equipped to serve, and you can't do this. That's a very, very likely scenario. Now, next step, what about they say, well, if we can't do that, Bill and Chef, we'll just sell you the system. And the answer to that is, we can do that. We can buy the system. And if we want to buy battery backup, we can buy battery backup, and so on and so forth. And that's the real, near to medium term scenario that I think Commissioner Orcutt was talking about. And that is, how soon does this happen? How soon does it happen that the all-in cost of solar is competitive versus grid-supplied power? Our retail rate for residentials is 12.4 cents a kilowatt hour. FPLs is 9.7 cents for the first 1,000 today. When the all-in price of solar falls to 8 or 7 or 11, it becomes competitive against us. At 11, it's competitive against Duke and Gulf. If it falls to 8, it's competitive against FPL. And if it falls lower than that, people start doing it. And that could happen. And that's another factor that militates, pushes in favor of taking a shorter-term deal with the OUC or with whomever, because at that point, you're not locked in for 15 years, 14 more years. You're locked in for 8. Realistically, probably, you're not going to see super penetration of rooftop solar in the next 8 years. We're at, I talk about the needle, moving the needle on, and just in general public policy terms, if we had a needle that goes from 0% renewable energy to 100% renewable energy over here, electrically we're about here. We're about 3%. Actually, it's and most of that is solid waste generation. There's a little bit of solar, some solar water heat, and a little bit of other stuff. We're way over here. To move the needle really significantly in the next 8 years would be a major push. You just start thinking about the logistics of it. How many, at say 6 or 7 kilowatts on a residential rooftop, to get to 1 megawatt, you got to have 160, 170 installations. How many can you do in a year? Say you do 100 a month. That's 1,200 a year. So maybe that's 5 megawatts against a 70,000 megawatt system, or even against our system, which is 100 and plus or minus. We're a 180 megawatt system, counting 200 megawatt system, counting our peak demand and the required reserves that we have to have at 15%, and ultimately that's a federally backstopped regulatory requirement of the Florida Reliability Coordinating Council. But you have to meet your reliability obligations to keep the lights on. Now, as you install more solar, your peak will come down and your reserve obligation will come down, but it's just not going to happen that fast.
All right. Any other questions, Chef? I got a question, Jim. What do you want from us today on this? Right now, we've got these 3 alternates, but the questions on all of them.
You go ahead.
Okay, I'll give you my opinion, then Chef can give you his opinion.
All right.
Because sometimes he and I, we're friends, but sometimes we disagree on certain issues. But in this particular case, what I would like you to do is to take that information and you need to look at it, ask questions.
Well, we've asked a lot of questions.
But I think you'll get more questions as you go through some of those numbers, and make sure that you're as informed as you can be, because ultimately there's going to be not only this information, but possibly decisions on contracts that will come back for your recommendation to City Council. This will be presented to the City Council next Tuesday, but the Finance Commission has not seen it yet, and it's going to be part of, I presume, part of the mediation that will be taking place on Friday. And so that conversation is going. But I think, in my opinion, what you're doing is you're getting really fresh information. As a matter of fact, some of those numbers on that last page,
you got yesterday.
We had a document, and if you'll notice, they changed a little bit because of the changing climate. So, but Chef.
Well, I would also say that we need to know, like, such things as, how do we get this power here? Do we need, is FP&L going to do it? How long is this going to take? We know it'll take a couple of years before anything happens that we can take down the power plant, I assume. So essentially you're saying we got our next meeting for June 9th. So we really don't have to make a decision until June 9th.
We might consider something in May.
All right, well, June 9th isn't too far.
But I think what we're doing is we're trying to get a direction from this. What Chef's trying to do is get a direction from the city as to the 3 options and how do we narrow it down. And from my standpoint, the existing contract is our highest cost, so it really comes down to 2. And I think, in my opinion, the second case, or the one in which we shorten the term of the contract and we negotiate with OUC to make sure we have transmission and all those other issues that have to go, appears at this particular time, in my opinion, to be the best option. But I'm not ready to make that as a formal recommendation yet until we get a lot more information. Example, I just got this last night as well, so that's the point.
Well, number 1 gives you the best sort of bang for your buck if everything goes right, but number 2 probably has less risk.
And let me put number 1, because this is one of those areas that Chef and I have debated back and forth and all that other stuff. In the electric utility business, as well as water and sewer, or any other business, walking on a contract to me should be the last case resort. If we can negotiate with OUC a deal where we understand we terminate the contract as a contractual terms, I have no problem with that. But it's a very small world that we live in, and so when we go out and get power supply contracts, which we're going to have to do on the open market or otherwise, the terms and conditions of those could drastically change for a contract walker. Also, you can be assured OUC will pursue in any way they can, because we're not the only contract they have. And if everybody that had a contract with OUC said, well, I'm out of this, they're faced with a pretty major dilemma.
Right.
And so we sometimes we think of ourselves as sort of the leader of the world, but we really aren't. We're still a relatively small part of the world.
Okay.
Jim, can I ask, you're also going to be looking for recommendations on these cases from the Finance Commission, right?
That is correct, yes.
Wouldn't it be wise for us to have a joint, utilities and finance have a joint meeting, since I think we should have consensus from both of those groups? Otherwise, we could come up with one recommendation, they'll come up with another.
Jack, as far as I'm concerned, that would be fine if the two commissions want to meet. I think Chef making a presentation in front of everybody at one time is not a problem and probably would be favored. But oftentimes when we had our last joint meeting, we sort of got ourselves into a little screwy situation as to who's in charge and who's not type of thing.
Well, then let me ask a follow-up question. So let's say we pick alternate case 3 and they pick 2. Which one are you going to move forward?
We both of them would go to the city council and say recommendation from this commission, recommendation from that commission. Ultimately, the city council is going to make this decision. But they are looking at you, as they have historically, to give them your best advice that is untainted. I would not envision either the Finance Commission or the Utility Commission to make a decision based on what the other commission has done. I think you got to make it sort of independent.
Okay.
Could I just
one quick?
Concisely? Here's where I think we are. I think everybody agrees, whatever else you believe about anything else, the sale to FPL or anything else, I think everybody agrees that we want something different than the existing power purchase agreement we have with OUC. That narrows down pretty quickly, and which is similarly, we don't want a 15-year contract at lower rates, because the numbers indicate that it's just not that great a saving, and you're locked in for 15 years, and I know there's a lot of concern about that. So I think it really does reduce to what you said, Herb. It reduces to alternate case 2, stick with OUC under the latest improved offer, or figure out a way to get market power supply. And our ask of you right now is simply think about that and let's continue the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
If you don't have my number or my email address, you can get it from Tammy or Jim or Wayne. You can call me or email me anytime, and I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime.
The mayor's right behind you there. He seems to want to say something.
Well, I got an extra pair of glasses here. Herb, I don't agree with something you said. The clock is running. We're responsible to the public to do the best we can as soon as we can. Personally, I'd like to see us, City Council, make a decision in May. That may not be possible. Certainly none of us have the information to do that now. I also don't agree with Jim. I agree with him walking on a contract would be a very bad thing, no one likes to do that. I don't agree with the risk. Let me give you a little bit of philosophy. In looking at Chef and Bill and myself, you're looking at 3 economists. I haven't really practiced it in a number of years, but it is what I was trained in. And John Kenneth Galbraith once was asked, why do you economists make projections because they're always wrong? He says, because we're asked. And I think you got to put that into the equation. In other words, no matter what decision is made, it's going to be, to some degree, wrong. That's how it is. I think you also have to look at the learning curve. The history of industrialization or technology has been the cost of everything over time, over a long period of time, goes down. I think you have to look at that in light of the world power. I make a good part of my living on power companies, of all things. I have for a great period of time. The United States power industry is at the start of what's going on in Europe and across Europe in particular, in that if you're a power producer, that's a bad place to be. Peter Gorey points out there's one thing that could change that. The curve over a long term is going to be for lower cost power. When we signed the contract in April of 2008, allowing the demand charge to escalate, I don't know what we were thinking, because that's not the history of economics. But Peter Gorey points out if there are enough electric cars, maybe there's light at the end of the tunnel. I would also like to point out to you that in the short term, nothing cures price like price. Low prices generate a fall off in supply, and they correct themselves. And there's nothing that cures high prices like high prices. More supply comes in. And all this is just, really economics 201. What I want to give you is something to think about. For more than 40 years, I've bought for customers. I'm still doing it, although in a very small way. Most of those years, I was buying large quantities of soybean oil, but more soybean oils, peanuts, cottonseed oil, and so on, and selling it to people like Burger King, etc. I mean, a couple thousand truckloads a year. Over the years, I've dealt in those commodities, peanuts, orange juice. Got really burned after the hurricanes on orange juice, but be that as it may, because we were selling to Albertson and Safeway. And currently I do rice, and we sell to people like Chipotle and so on. One of the things I want to, and the reason I disagree with Jim's comment about risk, is when you're buying for a customer, and this is the thought I want to give you, when you're buying for a customer, and we're buying for customers, we're not buying for ourselves. I mean, after all, the city uses some of this power, but it might be 6%, 7%, something like that. Most of it Rob uses, really. We're buying for customers, and our responsibility is not to be as little wrong as possible, And one of the things I've found in doing that over the years is what's important if you're not the biggest guy in the world or you don't have the biggest cojones, excuse the expression, you need to be as close to the market as you can. You never get blamed if the market goes up and you go up. But you do get blamed if you hold a long position and the market goes down, which is precisely in Chef's introductory comments. I mean, very possibly to those that were in this room in the 60s and 70s, the FMPAs looked like good deals, and they were worried about what was going to happen to the future, and they wanted to lock up supply. And then we found out that the all requirements wasn't a good deal, and we made the right decision, and that was a right decision. We went with OUC, and we looked at their contract, and it was a great, great deal better. Now, if you look at OUC right now, in the sheet you have, OUC is $160 million, give or take, high from what we thought was low in 2008, and those were competitive prices at that point in time. It was actually bid. One of the things that's happened in the power business, and it happens, and we did it this way in the soybean business, is you have fixed and variable cost. And, I can blame no business for wanting to recover all their variable costs, namely fuel, and recover their fixed costs, the cost of the bonds, the depreciation of the asset, and so on. And, that's what obviously OUC or Florida Power and Light or anyone else wants to do. We have a marketplace today, and for the foreseeable future we probably will have, but nobody knows because price cures price. For the foreseeable future, we have a situation where power in this country and in Germany and in France and across Europe is being sold as long as you can recover the variable cost plus a bit of your fixed cost. And that's the way it is. And, that's the way we ran, 10 soybean plants, and we dealt with it, and, we lived through it, because if you have a plant, you've got to get cash flow out of the darn thing. As long as you can recover part of your fixed cost, you're better off. In looking at Bill's assumptions, yesterday, natural gas closed at $2.49 nearby, for what it's worth. I think he's got $3.61 in his assumption. But who's to say what gas will be? No one knows. So the thought I want to give you, the serious thought, is in thinking about risk, remember that the risk that you really want to guard against is being wrong against the marketplace. When you take the position, well, it might go up, therefore we're locking in, and therefore we protect against that, you are taking a risk. And I would submit to you a risk that is more intolerable, having dealt with Burger King, Safeway, Target, Walmart, you name them, over the years. When you are not a major player, and even if you're a major player, I mean, would you want to be Duke today as compared to Florida Power and Light in this particular state? I think the answer is probably no. So one of the things to consider is there is no way to avoid risk. We have risk. And when you consider risk, consider the risk of being too long is much worse than the risk of being too short. So from my own experience and dealing in commodities in 40 years, I wanted to give you that thought. And we're going to have to weigh it. We're going to have to make a decision. We're going to lean on you. I think, Jack, your suggestion of having a joint meeting is absolutely a very great one. We need the very best thought that all of you had. This has been an interesting session, a lot of good interchange. And but I would say the clock, going back to my original comment, the clock is running. If there's a way to get these rates down in October or January, it has to be done as soon as we can. And, Admiral Dewey, damn the torpedoes, we've got to move full speed ahead. We really, really do. So I think this is an interesting format. What it says is if you went to the market, you're $40-some-odd million better off, even if you had to pay the 50, which you don't really know you would or wouldn't. So I think you have to consider all of that, and we have to consider it. And God bless us, because we won't make a right decision. It's impossible. Florida Power and Light doesn't make right decisions either.
Okay, thank you. You through? One quick.
I'm good. I said what I needed to say.
Okay.
Our ask is think about this and call me up if you want, and we'll to be continued.
Well, thank you, Chef.
Thank you very much.
And I agree. We probably should have the next meeting with the Finance Commission, and I'm sure Peter will agree to that. So next, Bob, you want to come and give us a short update? We got to turn our TVs on.
Sure, you got it there. Will this
Rob,
work,
okay. Yep, they're on. Thank you. So give us all your...
Good morning, Commission. Rob Bolton, Water and Sewer Director. I just have some general slides here on the status of the STEP system. And then also I was going to give you an update on RO plant expansion and the sludge management facility along with it. But for right now, we'll go through this, if I can get this to work. Hey, there you go. All right. Currently, we have 500 of the 1,500 homes have been permitted through DEP for step system installation. That equates to Basin 1, which was Bethel Creek, and Basin 2, which is the Live Oak area, or Bethel by the Sea, which is just south of Bethel Creek, north of Beachland up to J.C. Park area. We just received that permit this week from the DEP. In the Bethel Creek area, currently there's availability of the step system lines installed to where they can just sign up and we can put a lateral end connection for them of 36 properties. And then by the end of next week, we should have another 24 properties. Hopefully with this rain, that will not set us off, because I just got texted from somebody in the field saying we need some rain days. So evidently it's raining pretty bad out there. Live Oak area, currently there's 51 properties. We really won't move out of the Bethel Creek area and install any more lines in that area until July. We've had one step system installation. It was the original design that we came up with. So I have some pictures to show you that. And there's approximately 25 homeowners that have contracts with septic tank installers that we're now working through those agreements, creating agreements with them so that they can come in and sign up and get installation started. So here is a picture of the directional drilling equipment that we purchased and showing some installations. There's the piece of equipment itself. If you look to on the right-hand side, you'll see rods. So as the way the equipment works is each 6-foot or 8-foot rod is loaded onto the truck and into the drilling rig, and then they continue to bore underneath, and eventually they'll pull back that green piece of PVC pipe or actually a polyethylene pipe. You could see it on the far side on the cones across the street, so it shows you that we bore underneath the road, come up, make connections, so there will be an excavation right where the pipes come up together, and we'll make connections at that point. So really very minimal intrusion into the property owners. We're not tearing up the roads. We're not digging across their front yards. This was our first installation. That is if you look at the green corrugated tank, that is what we call a Type 1 installation. It is a 2-foot container made out of PVC, lid on the top, glued lid on the bottom to keep out any of the water from coming in. And then if you look at the blue next to it standing there, that's what we call a biotube. So that goes inside the green tank. And if you look at the center of the blue tank, there's holes in there. So the water comes in through that, goes down through a filter, and then after it's filtered, it's pumped to the wastewater plant. This was an excavation to put the tank in. That was the existing septic tank. Very old septic tank, but structurally still sound. That is Meeks Plumbing, who did the first installation, standing in the hole they just dug, and that's inserting the tank and leveling it off. The way that the tank is designed, or the system's designed, if you look at the gentleman there that's standing in the hole, the furthest pipe away from him is where the septic tank effluent comes down inside of it, and then where he's kind of in between, the one closest to the tank, that's where the effluent will come back out if the power was to be lost for the pump station.
So is the green tank just holding the pump?
The pump and the biotube, you'll see here in a second. We'll get to the next picture. There are furthermore installations. And then there you go. To the right, you'll see the final installation, which is the tank with the biotube and the pump and the electrical connections coming back out. So yes, that tank is just really holding the pump. So the water kind of fills from the bottom up through the tank, goes through the little holes that are in that blue thing that's inside the biotube, then goes down into the pump, and then there's floats in there. So when the water rises by 4 inches, the pump kicks on and then pumps it down. So in the case of these small systems, about every 8 gallons that leaves the house, it'll cycle the pump.
So their septic is still there, but just...
The septic tank is still there. This is the little tank that it overflows into. Okay. And then if the power was to fail, then what would happen is the water would rise high enough now and then go back out into the drain field.
Right.
So here is, as we talked, Type 1A, which was the original design we came up with. That was the first one that was installed. And in that case is you have the existing septic tank, you leave the drain field in place, and you install a little proposed pump basin right in between the two and put a check valve in. The equipment cost for that is $2,625. Originally, we estimated at $3,000, so we're slightly underneath the cost for what we proposed. If they were to do away with the drain field and put a larger pump basin in so the drain field was gone, that equipment cost is $2,725. Next alternative is where the tank is bad itself. So they come in and they install a new septic tank, and then the pump system goes inside the tank itself. So for a 3-bedroom house, that equipment cost is $3,220. For a 5-bedroom house, it's $3,635. And in those situations, the drain field is still salvageable as a backup. And then for the next set of options you have, if the drain field is bad and has to be taken out because you're building a new house or you're combining two tank systems on somebody's property into one, and everything has to be lowered, you start running into the type 3 scenarios. And for a 3-bedroom, you would have a 1,000-gallon tank plus a 500-gallon pump tank. For a 5-bedroom, you would have a 1,500-gallon tank plus a 500-gallon pump tank. So in those situations, equipment cost rises to $3,745, or worst case scenario for any residential home is $4,160. In most of these cases, your install cost for the septic tank contractor is going to be somewhere in the $2,500 to $3,500 range, depending on how many septic tanks they have to abandon and everything else is what I'm kind of seeing pricing. And then you have an electrician that's running somewhere between $500 and $700, where you have to pull new lines across, get up in the attic and run lines all the way to the other side of the house or something like that is a little more expensive. These are multifamily. Really, we're only going to have multifamily in the Bethel Creek area, but we've already been having people coming in to sign up for those. Different scenarios are where they have a duplex and they have an existing septic tank and they just need to put a 500-gallon pump chamber in. In those cases, they're about $4,280 for equipment cost. Where they have to replace everything, they're at about a $5,700 cost, $5,715. And then on a 4-plex, so in a 4-plex you're getting multiple tanks, larger pump basins. You're up for an existing system is about $6,000, and then replacing everything for a 4-plex runs about $9,000 in equipment. So there's a breakdown of the typical charges and fees. So you can see from the top, from type 1A all the way down to type 5B, you go from $2,600 to $9,000. Really, the last 4 deal with multifamily development type stuff. So the ones that you would want to look at are type 1A through type 3B, which is the residential family type system. So in this case, somebody comes in, they sign up, they get charged a utility extension charge, and they get charged an impact fee if they're within the first year, or really the ones that are coming in now, we haven't even noticed them. So they're getting the credits at the bottom. They then receive a step up and save credit of $2,290, which offsets the impact fee. And then they also would receive, for paying cash, a utility extension credit. So in essence, all they pay for is the equipment and the installation of the equipment on their property. These are the 7 companies that went through our training program that was put on by the manufacturers, and who now are considered system installers. Any other company that wants to become a system installer, they can. However, they have to go to the location of the manufacturer for their training. We're not going to bring manufacturers in every month for training. It's a not one time, but once a year. They will be back next year to do training again. That's it. Any questions?
Excuse me, Rob. Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
What is you've got people outsourcing the installation, but what is the impact on your staff with all this additional work?
The impact is quite a bit. I mean, to me, to people in my office, and then to our field people that are installing the lines. I think our process of installing lines will pick up as time goes on, because what we're experiencing right now is the individuals that are suffering with problems with their septic tanks that want to get hooked up right away. So we're kind of jumping around, and where we had a plan, that you might as well have thrown that out the window as you're driving out to the job site, because it's changing daily, just to satisfy, which is the reason why I chose to do the installations in-house versus contracting that part out, because we're able to do that. If you were trying to tell a contractor you got to pick up from here now and move over there tomorrow, it would cost us a fortune. So, and then I expect a second wave that's going to occur once I get Bethel Creek done and I send the letters out. Now all of a sudden that 1 year clock starts ticking. Then people that don't have a septic tank problem but want to take advantage of the financing or take advantage of the financial incentives, they're going to be now calling up and saying, okay, now I want mine hooked up. So it's going to be chaotic for probably the next 6 months, but I think after that point it'll probably kind of slow down and become more steady. At least that's my optimistic view of it at this point.
Let's hope you don't have to develop a short-term rental model.
Oh, no. Now, and long-term, if you look at the staffing, side of things, it really doesn't impact us. And that was somebody, I was talking to somebody the other day, and actually it was one of the septic tank contractors. And we were talking about these and what the maintenance is on it. And when I first, prior to presenting this to the city council, you talk with people that have grinder stations, and they have 1,200 grinder stations, and they have 6 people that have to maintain it. I talked to Tennessee, and they have 4,500 of these units out there, and they're doing the same work that you would on a grinder with 4 or 5 individuals. So they're less maintenance. They're more of a bulletproof system and design, and less headaches for us. And we didn't want to get into something where we were going to have to bring on a lot of staff into the utility. We were in the downsizing as we were. The last thing I wanted to do was come back and say, now we got to start adding people back in. So, I'm looking long term. You got 1,500 of these units. We should be able to maintain them with a maximum increase of 2 people over time. If you look at what the revenues coming in, they'll easily fund those 2 additional people. So I think long term it's actually a good solution for a problem that we have here, and I think it's something that'll be done at a fairly low cost.
All right, thank you.
I would like to publicly congratulate you for taking an initiative on this. It's been awesome that you've worked with the health department and the county to come up with the mapping of all the septics countywide so we can get a big picture of what the problem is. And then I know it wasn't easy to fight through the permitting for the step. So way to go.
Yeah, and it's starting. Palm Bay's calling me. They're looking at it. Carl Larrabee at the Water Management Districts, he's kind of promoting it because what he likes is the backup of the drain field. People were like, oh, the drain field, you're still going to have a pollutant. But if you're a utility person, the reason nobody has looked at these things in the past is because there has to be a backup to the resident. You have to have a way of getting wastewater out of their house. So with this type of a scenario, then it works. So.
You might want to say something about the rejuvenation of the drain field.
Oh, yeah, in drain fields, one of the questions has come up, well, my drain field failed, but you're leaving it in place. Well, part of a drain field failure is because you're hydraulically loading it every day. And a drain field will start to clog once you start using it. However, at the same time, you'll have a bacteria in the soil that'll start to work at the biomat that's formed and will over time, if you stop using the drain field, it will rejuvenate itself, especially for the little usage you're going to have, which would be a hurricane outage of say, a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. It should work fine. Any questions on STEP? Okay, on our RO plan expansion, I don't have any presentation on that other than a verbal. We'll have another meeting, progress meeting next week. We're at a 90% design plans. You asked about workload. I haven't even reviewed the 30 and the 60. I have a staff that's doing that, but usually I would have been more up to date on what's actually going on, other than looking at it from the big picture. I've been dealing with it from the big picture and making sure that the conceptual ideas of what we want are being followed. The details I haven't really gotten into. On the and there will be some other stuff that we'll be looking at in this year's budget. One of the items that we evaluated was our odor control that's there at the at the RO plant, and right now we have what they call a biofilter that is wood chips. So we take the odorous air that comes off our air strippers and we pump that through a bed that consists of rock and piping, and then it comes up through wood chips and then gets released to the atmosphere. And the wood chips break down and there's bugs and growth, and it's another biological process. However, over the years, if you're there at the plant, there's always this faint hydrogen sulfide gas. You really don't smell it unless you're there at the plant. And what we've determined is when we originally designed the biofilter bed and we did some sampling of the air quality was right at 50 parts per million of hydrogen sulfide gas. That has risen to 85 parts. So we've had an increase in the concentration that's coming off of our air strippers. That's just really the water that's in the ground over time, and that's why we're having this problem. So we're going to have to do some expansions of those beds that we're working on pricing, but they'll be phased in over time. I don't necessarily, and instead of where we had very small compartment size, I think the next one we'll do is just one large bed, which should be substantial savings versus compartment type bed systems. So we'll probably be discussing that at a future utility commission meeting. On the sludge facility, we had signed contracts with the contractor. However, prior to startup, we discussed the possibility of relocating to another. It was a building, but now it's just a slab that's there. Actually, the contractor proposed it to us. We think long-term it's a better solution because it no longer has us getting rid of the biosolids in a dumpster. We can now put a truck inside this building and haul it out in truckloads. So we're going through the details on that change. Right now it looks like for the contractor, there really isn't a net end of the day increase in the contract. However, there's some, because of the way the contractor can be reoriented, there's some savings in sales tax and stuff like that we're looking at. And then there will be a little bit additional cost to us on the utility side because we're going to have to change some of the plans that we had. And then there's an extension of electric from where we were 100 feet away that may be a little bit more cost. So I'll get that information back to you of more specifics when we get to that point. But that still is moving along.
This is all at the site by the 17th Street Bridge.
The sludge is, yeah. The original RO plan is the site at the airport.
Okay.
Any questions?
Any question? All right. Thank you, Rob. Cindy?
Just a quick sidelight. I heard your earlier discussion about the net metering. The city does have a net metering program. Right now, though, and we report on that activity to the PSC every year, and I'm happy to forward the latest report to you. Right now, we have about 20 people that participate, all of them solar, and of those 20 people, only 4 are actually generating enough that they are selling back to the grid. The rest of them are merely, lightening their own bills, but not actually producing any net power back to the grid. So I'm happy to forward this. So the program is there. I think the real challenge that I heard you discussing is getting people to put solar on their homes and businesses and participate. So we have the mechanism, but maybe not the interest at this point. So anyway, I'll forward this. I'll have
You
Sherry
said how
forward
many
this.
are actually on net metering? Or
20.
20, but then how many are actually?
Of the 24 of them are actually generating enough that we are paying them net amounts as opposed to just reducing their own bill. This is an excellent report because it shows, by month what they're generating and selling to us versus what they're taking from us. So I'll forward this and you can have a look at it. The item that I have on the agenda is actually our second quarter rate sufficiency for the electric utility. This is our original projections updated against our actual sales, billed revenue, and purchase power costs through month-end March, so the first half of the year. Right now, we're looking pretty much the same as we did after second quarter. We're showing a surplus of about $900,000, which is a little less, or right around 1% of revenue. So our usual fairly, thin margin. And as a result, what we're recommending is that there be no adjustment to the rates at this time. This is also consistent with the preliminary rate study that was presented to you by PRMG, where, again, our rates in total are sufficient, and we believe that should continue through the end of the fiscal year, and certainly as we move into next fiscal year's budget activities, as well as some of the other changes that are possibly taking place with expenditures. We'll have our rate consultant look at that again for next year. So I also added, I think it was someone on this commission asked for some bar graphs. So the last page includes not just the comparison by month of our sales, our billed revenue, and our purchase power costs to our original forecast, but also a year-to-date in a bar graph form that shows our actual year-to-date by customer class and by power provider. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I don't know that there's really an action item unless you want to recommend something different. We're just recommending that rates stay the same at this time.
It looks like we're doing pretty well.
We're actually tracking extremely closely to our original forecast. So we feel like that should continue throughout the year, and we'll be fine. Any other questions?
Love the graphs.
Thanks. Everyone loves graphs. Thank you.
It does help. Unfortunately, when I tried to print it out at home, it didn't print.
Yeah, that's why I have them forwarded in color.
Yeah, right.
They don't have a lot of punch without the color.
But the copies we got here were very good. All right, thank you. Any old business? I don't think we have any. I don't have anything. Does anybody else have anything for the commission? The next meeting date on here is June 9th. Sherry, you work with the Utility Commission, see if they can work that in.
On a joint meeting with the Finance Commission?
Finance Commission.
Yes.
If we get the information we want from Chef.
I was going to say I'm also, and George and Cindy are on the Stormwater Utility Committee.
On the 9th?
No, we're meeting on the 12th of May. And from that meeting, I think that day that we're scheduled to make a recommendation on a consultant. And then the Finance Commission meeting is May 14th. And we would like to get back to the Utility Commission also as soon as possible, because I think if we can hit I don't see us hitting the last meeting in May to go to the council, but if we could, that'd be great. If not, it'd be the first one in June. So whatever you do on your next meeting, if you can make it earlier.
You're saying by the 14th?
Mr. Chairman, yes.
So you'd like one about the 16th or so or something?
We would really like it on the 14th, since the Finance Commission's already meeting on that, if you could work out, or if Sherry could work out with the chairman of the Finance Commission, use that date and have the joint meeting at that time.
Well, Chef's shaking his hand. He's not going to have the information by then. Yeah.
I apologize, and while you all are a very important client, I am just flat booked all week, the week of May 11th. I've got deposition prep and depositions Monday through Thursday, the 14th, so I cannot be here that day.
I guess that
Sorry, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
All right.
We have to live with the schedules that we're dealt, so
Well-
I think using an established date would really be good, because then we know we can get the majority if we can get the Finance Commission to meet on that June the 9th date as well.
All right. So we'll stick with June the 9th.
It appears
Because I'll be
that's-
back. I'm gone from the 5th to the 22nd. But that
Because
doesn't
we'll miss
matter.
that. You're going to be gone from the 5th to the 22nd, so you're going to be gone on the 9th? Maybe we need to make it toward the
No,
end.
no,
of
I'll be.
That
no,
would be in May.
Oh, May.
I'll be
Okay,
back in
okay.
June.
Okay.
So June 9th, I guess our next meeting will be June 9th, and see if you can organize with the Utility Commission. And Shep, you could be there on 9?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, we might have to take all day. Yeah. Yeah. Any other comments, suggestions, questions?
I just wanted to thank Tammy Vock for letting us know about the Sunshine Law seminar, which also addressed commissions and advisory boards and how to run them properly. It was a great suggestion, and George and I were there. And you think the same thing, George? I thought it was great. I just wanted to thank Tammy.
Very informative.
Is this the one in Sebastian?
Yes, it was part of the Sebastian City Council meeting. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I guess we can't talk to each other anymore then if the meeting is adjourned.
Okay.
So, meeting is adjourned.